If you didn't hear that come across your screen, we are recording this session. This session is part of a wellness series that is sponsored by Verdant Consulting. So I'd like to thank them for being our sponsor here today. My name is Kim Arnold, and I have been a part of this series as a roundtable panelist as well as facilitator, which is the role I'll play today. So I want to welcome you all to it. We're going to be talking about wellness and well-being in the workplace, not as it relates to, say, a diagnosis. We have had a prior session on that with where we talked about things like depression, substance abuse, PTSD. So you'll want to look back at that session. Today, our focus is just really on burnout and just general well-being in the workplace. So just kind of let you know why we're going to be guiding the discussion in that way. I'd like our panelists, we have a great global panel here today, to introduce themselves. And I will start with our host from Verdant Consulting. Dr. Al, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks again, Kim, for facilitating another roundtable conversation. And thanks to everybody who's taking time out of the middle of their day and their busy week, especially during the holiday season. We set up this roundtable topic because, you know, I jokingly say I'm going to get a t-shirt that says emotions are not an illness. And so I call this the ubiquity of emotions. We all have them, but we hesitate to talk about them. And so I'm excited for us to talk about that today. Just a little bit about me. I'm the CEO of Verdant Consulting. We offer training on resiliency, emotional agility, and psychological health and safety.
Great. And you are in, did you say where you're at?
I didn't. I'm in Boston,
okay,
Massachusetts.
Okay, now let's move on to Jay.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Jay Washington, Senior Community Manager for Headspace Health. I've been with the organization almost 2 years, but I've worked in the community space for a couple decades. And so I'm currently in Cincinnati, Ohio, and really passionate about the idea of well-being, community, and how organizations can be proactive in their approach.
Great, thank you. Philip.
Hey, good afternoon here from Providence, Rhode Island. I am Philip Swayze. I'm the East Region Practice Leader for Hub. I'm part of the Health and Performance team. My work with Hub, I provide strategic consulting to clients up and down the East Coast. In addition to my work with Hub clients, I'm also part of hero work groups around mental health and well-being, and a new board member for the Worksite Wellness Council of Mass. And I'll say a little bit more about some of the hero work because it's definitely relevant for our topic today. Thanks for having me.
Sure, thanks. And Hannah?
Hi everyone, I'm coming to you from Christchurch in New Zealand, so it's very early morning here. I am the CEO and founder of the Kite program, and we are a wellbeing and mental health app publisher, and we create very tailored solutions for our clients, focusing on micro bites, so very small pieces each day to improve wellbeing and making that achievable. My background is in HR, and I'm also a mental health advocate, so I'm very passionate about reducing the stigma, but also creating very practical solutions for people within the workplace.
Great, thanks. And Dörte.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. This is Dörte Heimbeck. I'm the Associate Chief Wellness Officer at Moffitt Cancer Center, the only NCI designated cancer center in the Northeast. And I have been working on the theme of well-being here in this clinical setting for the last 3 years, most recently in this role of Associate Chief Wellness Officer. I have a background in medicine and psychology, so emotions are a very nice intersection between these two fields and always make for a great conversation with physicians. I work as a physician coach and have done some leadership advising for the organization. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm joining you from sunny Florida at 77 degrees. Glad to be here.
Great, thank you. So as you can see, we've got a diverse set of panelists here, both from location as well as experience. In the invitation and the LinkedIn messages, there a lot of people were tagged, so you can see everybody's LinkedIn profile, learn more about them, reach out to them if you believe from this conversation or checking them out that they could be of help to you. I'm going to guide us through by asking a few questions, but as far as the way that we'll run this roundtable is, you'll see that, you know, we'll just all kind of chime in. And when we did our prep session, we had some great dialogue, and sometimes we think we just start talking to each other because as a group of professionals, we get so excited. We will ask you guys if you want to ask questions or provide any thoughts through chat. You can go ahead and open your chat. We'll be looking at that periodically, and I can respond to that. Or if I feel like it's something we might bring to the larger group, we can bring that topic up. But I'm going to start our conversation just in general. As we think about emotional well-being and burnout, it seems to be everywhere these days. LinkedIn, Facebook, the news, media. What do you believe is driving this? And anyone can start.
I'll just throw out, you know, Kim, that there's so much going on, right? Social, racial injustice, COVID-19, our favorite topic. You know, the whole sort of movement around social determinants of health, diversity, equity, inclusion, Me Too movement, right? Political divisions, right? All of this, you know, the complex and costly policies that are sort of coming forward from all of this. I think that, like, everyone's cheese has been moved, right? And so it's kind of getting people going.
I also think,
You go, Jay.
I was just going to quickly say, I also think there's been this license given to talk about it amongst a broader community. I think historically you are in safe spaces throughout home and work that you feel comfortable, but as we all realize that there is a universal need for conversation around wellness, I think there's this opportunity to really dig deeper.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also the working from home has highlighted the burnout, because people can't separate. It was very hard to separate work and then home life. And so it blurs, which obviously is just a huge concern for people, because they can't, you know, they don't have the travel between work and home, which, you know, might have been the time that they, you know, listened to a podcast or wound down a little bit before they started their home life. And so that's very much highlighted it. And I'd agree with the talking about it a lot, but I think that we're probably getting back into that situation where we talk a lot about it, but there's not a lot of solutions. So burnout is this buzzword, and it's almost like people become desensitized to it, and, you know, it's everywhere. That's what we do, whereas we're not moving into the solution focus.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that? Because that's actually what took me on my journey. Was I realized I was burnt out, and I was like, okay, everybody's been talking about it, so let me turn the page and see what happens when you actually are. And I realized those pages were pretty empty. And so that's why I decided to make the shift I did career-wise into, well, certainly there's got to be better solutions than what I can find now. And so I became very active in this space because of that absence.
Yeah, and I hope that this will give us an opportunity to talk about some of those and share some of those solutions and ideas with you guys. And what we've seen either in the places where we work or the companies that some of you work with. And, you know, Hannah, you mentioned the concept of work-life balance. You know, historically, it feels like that's the only aspect of emotional well-being that's even been focused on. You know, we keep emotional well-being at an arm's length, and in fact, often even discouraged certain conversations, you know, that it was even appropriate that they take place. But this has been changing. So talk about how you've seen it changing, what you've seen changing, and what you see is still not changing. And then we'll move into solutions. But let's talk about kind of what you see happening in the workforce.
I can just go. I think that the work-life balance used to be very much, that's your problem. You're an employee and your work-life balance is your issue, and it's up to you to ensure that you have that. And I think that, you know, it has definitely been highlighted now that that's, you know, it's an employer, you know, community problem, not just on the individual. So that, I think that is a positive trend in that direction, that it actually is, you know, a relationship between employee, employer, to move through that.
I think there's also a move, as Alex previously mentioned, from the what to the how. And working for an organization like Headspace, where the how is really the focus. I think it's really important to acknowledge that from a work or an employer standpoint, again, this awareness of the need to be a part of the how, to provide solutions for the how, is really prevalent, and moving that work-life balance into the wellness space, which is the natural progression.
Yeah, and I would just sort of add on to that. It feels like the work-life balance idea is this construct that we keep putting out there, and I really feel like people need to own it for themselves. And I think that that's long been sort of the assumed solution. And, you know, Jay, as you pointed out, and Hannah, now there's more language and solutions around how do you shape that, right? If you think about the work that's being done by Kumanu, when they're helping people to align their personal purpose with the work purpose. And I think it's that alignment that helps work-life balance to feel less like work and more like life. And if it's out of balance, that's when you're seeing people leaving their jobs because it doesn't feel right.
You know, I know one of the things that I saw was, you know, just past couple years has been organizations starting to realize they needed to ask their employees how they were doing. We saw that after, you know, post George Floyd's, you know, murder, leaders wanting to check in with their employees and how are you doing? And then as we saw that COVID was going to kind of extend a bit, and realized that people were experiencing family members, you know, perhaps suffering, saying, you know, checking in with them. So we've been checking in a lot more, perhaps. A leadership IQ study showed that 81% of leaders don't know what to do about the burnout on their teams. So let's go ahead and start talking about solutions, but I want to focus on leaders first. What can we do to help leaders address this?
I think it's important to recognize that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. As a professional Black woman in these spaces, you know, you think about burnout and you think about there's various types of burnout, and then there are subsets of causes of the burnout. And for me, leaders should really recognize that when looking for solutions, the solutions should be as diverse as their talent. And so I think it's really important to explore what that looks like and how that might benefit the overall organization.
Mm-hmm. I think education obviously is key. I think if you think about even 5 years ago, the word burnout would often be used as like a badge of honor, you know, like I'm burnt out, like I must be a really driven, you know, successful person because I've got to the point of burnout, where obviously now it is definitely not seen as that. But I think that there's a lot of leaders that, you know, just don't potentially understand the effects of it, or, you know, how long it could affect their people. And so being able to give that education, but as you've said, you know, making it tailored to their profession or their understanding, or, you know, not making it this sort of blanket training that's given to people on what is burnout and what can you do. It needs to be what is burnout and what this means for your people and their roles, and why is it that their particular role or their particular, you know, balance in life has caused them to go, you know, in that direction. I think that's really key.
I think what you just said about the cultural phenomenon of wearing burnout like a badge of honor is particularly prevalent in the healthcare industry, or with the profession of physicians. who still pride themselves of needing no sleep, no food, and no breaks ever. And one very practical solution that we have tried to establish here is that our leaders try to role model intentional setting of boundaries and breaks. And as trivial as the language in an out of office message. So I have worked as a coach with our physician leaders to encourage them to word their out of office message in a way that highlights that they're not just accidentally away from the office, but back in a second, but they say, I'm on vacation and I'm intentionally trying to recharge. I appreciate if you would reach out to someone else in the interim time until I'm back, to really break that mold of excessive self-sacrifice as a positive thing, and changing that towards a role model of a physician who can only give empathy and compassionate care if they express those notions to themselves as a human being.
And to kind of build on that, one of the things that, and again, one of the motivations for me to create the programs I did was we talked about leaders supporting their teams, but we didn't really talk about leaders supporting themselves. And so understanding that just because I'm promoted to a manager, just because I'm in a leader position, my emotional needs don't disappear. Rather, they're put into sometimes a more fragile context, because I have the pressure of not just having to deal with my own emotions, but the emotions of my team, the emotional needs of my team, and also being under kind of that microscope and strain of being a leader of an organization. And so I think educating leaders on not just telling them that they need emotional intelligence, but giving them the core competencies to manage their emotional load, to be able to recognize how they respond to stress, to be clear about why they wanted to be a leader in the first place and what they stand for. Those are all the things that I don't think we fully educate people on the how. We tell them the why, we tell them the what, but we don't really give them the detailed tactics in order to do that. And I think that there's a big opportunity to do more of that.
I want to comment on the chat. Matthew had provided a comment that said we need to train our leaders in active listening and empathy. And as someone that so much of my career, my focus has been on leadership development, especially at the more executive level development. And, I know when we were talking about active listening, it was more about how to deal with conflict and how to work through issues in the workplace. It wasn't about listening actively and with empathy so that you can understand how your employees are truly feeling about things. If they feel like they have safety in the workplace, if they feel that they have a sense of belonging, and really listening to those are the kind of examples that I know that, in my network, as we were sharing what we were doing in programs, we were talking about that. So in a sense, we haven't done enough equipping. So some of it is also, I think, that skill building. So I appreciate that comment, Matthew. Other thoughts?
Oh, I want to echo that skill building plays an important role. In particular, segment of the workforce I'm working with, I find that there's only a rudimentary vocabulary highly educated physicians have on speaking and identifying their emotions. And sometimes it starts there, to identify that there are other states of being than fine, I'm fine. And really becoming a little bit more nuanced in discovering their own emotions, which makes them, since they typically tend to be very quick learners, much more in tune with a differentiated emotional landscape in their colleagues and their patients.
I think there's a lot of people who that feel that there's a lot of leaders that are just uncomfortable. Like, I think we need to accept that it isn't just natural for people to sit down and talk about someone's mental health and their burnout, and potentially actually having some scripts for people, like, these are how you can start the conversation, and giving them those black and white, I guess, tools there. And I think it really does depend on the type of organization and the type of profession. You know, there's certain professions that are, you know, it isn't natural to talk with those words and bringing those things up. So I think we have to kind of almost just really accept that there's a lot of people that aren't quite comfortable, and we need to help them with that.
Yeah, so Hannah, I totally agree with that, and I think that something also that Dörte said, you know, is around giving people permission, right? And the skill building piece, right, is that AMSO model for you know, sort of geeks on the behavior change spectrum here, right? That Michael O'Donnell put forward, that the AMSO model is awareness, motivation, skill building, and opportunity to practice. And what we tend to do is just continue to create awareness. I'm going to let you know about this, and I'm going to let you know about this. And we're like, yeah, we get it. I know, but you don't get the tools. And what I love is that, you know, some of the people who are on this call, right? Like Al and Jay and Hannah, you know, you guys are solving some of this problem, or at least you're putting forward a solution, because I do think that there is a challenge that people don't know where to start.
Mhm.
And Kim, just one last thing I'll say around how do we get leaders, you know, sort of into this. We've been talking about that with the workplace performance mental health work group at Hero that I'm now co-chairing. And what we're doing is trying to find the bright spots, because this is a super hard problem to solve. And oftentimes you just need to tell a really good story. You need people to understand, leadership to understand that the path forward with addressing this might feel a little hard, but like we've kind of mapped out what you need to do.
Mhm.
And so it's a matter of sort of finding someone to help you guide through that, and then seeing that some of your industry peers are actually making this happen, and it's paying off for them.
And as you talk about that, Philip, in our prep session, one of the things we talked about is that leaders want solutions and they're asking for help, but they also aren't, it's not something that maybe they had budgeted for or planned for, right? So they're kind of looking for like free stuff or what's out there that, you know, and I know some of you are like, yeah, you know, I mean, our products aren't, you know, free. We've put a lot into this. And how are you guys helping people build like a business case for your leaders to invest in this and flip that kind of thing, that this is now worth investing in financially? Because as we start to talk about solutions for employees, some of those have a cost to them, right? And you know, we're one of the very few webinars that are free that I'm seeing out there. And I know some of you might have jumped on because, oh, something's free, maybe I can get some tips. But let's talk about how we help build that case for investment from our leaders, and then we'll talk about some ideas and tips.
So there's two things I'd like to talk about with that. Number one is, if you aren't paying attention to the large departure and change that employees are making, I don't know where you've been. And you know, there's studies that show, I think it's a high percentage. I can't remember it now, Kim, I think I put it in the notes, but it's a large percentage of employees would leave an organization for better well-being benefits. So they're leaving not because of COVID. In fact, Gallup just put out a study, I think it was yesterday, was they're leaving not about COVID, but they're and not about where they work. It's about how they're treated. So, I mean, if you think your employees help you make money, then maybe you want to keep them. So I think that's a good kind of mathematical equation. But the other one is, and then ISO put out this summer the ISO 45003, which is focused on creating psychological safety within your organization. So that's not about the individual need. That's about creating the structure and the environment in which people feel safe to take risks, but also to be safe. And so I just recorded a podcast this morning on this topic, in fact, that showed that if I have a sense of belonging, my chance of injury decreases by 50%. And injury costs money. And so just like you would invest in PPE for the physical well-being of your employees, you have to invest in the PPE for the emotional well-being, because it isn't just about if I feel sad, it's about keeping the organization and our team members safe.
And just to build on that, just really quickly, because there's a I also feel like many organizations have the ostrich complex where their heads are in the sand, where it's happening everywhere but within their organization. And so before we can even begin to talk solutions, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement and awareness and an accountability that it is not an isolated case. When, as I was doing research of my own for this, specifically thinking of the DEI element, and that, microaggression, racial biases. And so thinking about all that within your organization has to be an uncomfortable truth before we can even begin to talk about sending out broader solutions for employees.
In healthcare, you can certainly look at recruitment cost as a metric that creates a pretty tangible ROI on any kind of well-being related expenses. And if you factor out growth of an organization and you identify an increase in your recruitment costs for example, clinicians, which are notoriously expensive to recruit, you have the dollar figure right there. You expand that to low well-being and the connection to errors, patient errors, clinical safety. You have another big dollar figure through litigation right then and there. So I think COVID has certainly brought this more into the forefront. But on the clinician side, we have seen well-being efforts very proactively used in recruiting and retention because this coming generation of medical students graduating from their residencies or fellowships expect a very different environment that the boomers and the Gen Xers who are currently in charge have role modeled.
And I'd like to offer up anybody who's on the call, and I'll send this in the notes too, that if you're looking for an ROI report, I have access to many different research studies that show the financial benefit to investing in the emotional well-being of your leaders. Let's just start there. But there's all kinds of data behind all of this.
Okay, so I'm going to shift us. I think those are some really good suggestions, especially about, when you want to influence your leaders to make investments, you build that business case, and data and metrics and research and numbers are going to speak to them. So I appreciate that. You had mentioned, Allessandria, a statistic. One of the ones I've seen is up to 80% of employees would leave their current employer for one with a better well-being resource. It both says that the company cares about that, but also that they're offering them some tools and resources. What do you guys see companies doing? What are some ideas? What's best in class? What can some of us be doing here to help address these needs and situations?
I think the key thing is tailoring it to the people. So, traditionally 5-10 years ago, it was maybe here's some gym memberships and here's a fruit bowl, like that's the, we always refer to. And then realizing that actually your workforce, maybe not interested in exercise, or that doesn't suit their lifestyle. So, really working out from your people of what is going to be important to them. And it might be things that surprise you, it might be the fact of even giving to a charity is actually something that's good for their well-being. And I think organizations, they don't know unless they ask and they actually spend time co-creating with their workforce. It's just not enough to find a generic solution and roll it out and hope for the best. So I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, I would echo that customization is critically important. Another approach that we are currently very intentionally taking is to group the gym membership, the healthy food choices in the category of benefits and or perks. But in the work on culture, on awareness, on appreciation, etc., to focus or have our eyes on the ball of connecting employees and clinicians back to the meaning and purpose that is inherently in their jobs. So approaching well-being really not from how many hours do you work or do you have the right tools at all times. It's about can you get each and every employee to work, and there's studies out there that have actually put a percentage on that, and that is, can you get them to spend at least 20% of their day on activities that creates meaning and purpose for them? And that percentage inoculates them a little bit better against kind of the injury that comes from inefficiency, from moral injuries of not being able to do what one sets out to do at all times. So we are really trying to focus heavily on creating programs and services that focus in on what gives you meaning and purpose in your job, because that seems the best kind of defense against burnout.
I also think
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Jay.
Okay, really quickly, I just really think it's also important to have sort of a two-pronged approach. It's finding tools and resources out there like Headspace that provides not just a focus on workplace burnout, but like this overarching theme of well-being that isn't limited to, 9 to 5, whether it's mindful money or mindful eating, finding things that approach it as in a holistic way. So that's the tools and resources that are really important, but it's also addressing things in-house leadership and management, using things like fostering belonging and showing direct support, training managers against microaggression, equity in pay, and other differences within an organization all contribute to the overall well-being of a human, not just an employee.
Yeah, I love that. No, and I'll just to sort of continue to build on that and what Dörte was saying, things like job crafting help people to sort of put their own little stake in the sand. And I think it's really important to reference that, Dörte is working, in a physician organization, and you don't have to be saving people's lives or like, doing something that is benefiting another human to find purpose. And so it's really sort of stopping to say, how can I inject purpose into the work that I do? How do I attach to it? And I think, Jay, it's part of what you said, that it needs to be multifaceted. It can't just be a program, right? It has to be kind of a culture shift. And some of this stuff, as we get sort of tactical, like that's free, right? Modeling good behavior, expressing gratitude to your fellow employees, that stuff's free. And if you think about like other, we haven't really touched on, employee resource groups, that's a huge opportunity to let people with some passion around a topic, like create something that's meaningful to them, and then to bring other people in. That's going to help your retention. It's going to help build purpose. I think it will help with recruitment, because then you'll see people will say like, oh, they have organizations of people who are like me, because I might be feeling a little disenfranchised. So I think that there's a lot of really sort of innovative things that you can do without spending a lot of money. And clearly there's a lot of services that are available to help with that. I would draw people's attention to a recent McKinsey report that looked at sort of the things that employers were doing and the things that employees wanted. And for those of you who have seen it, there's a great like chart that kind of maps it out, and what the employers are doing to address this and what the employees want, they're not intersecting. And so, be bold, ask your employees what they actually want. And then I guess be prepared to, do some of it.
That's
not everyone gets a pony, but you gotta ask.
Yeah. Well, so Philip, another study that I read showed that these kind of generic, like Hannah was speaking to, these generic solutions, they get such a low take rate, a 5% take rate, that they're not even a blip from a data point of view, as opposed to these more customized and impactful programs, which have a 70% improvement in dealing with big emotions. And so there are things that can have better impact, I think what we hit on earlier was that it needs to be important to me individually. And so that customization piece is critical, because one size fits all doesn't work. I love what you said as well about role clarity. So if you look at psychological safety, psychological health and safety, it isn't just about managing expectations. It's also about creating the structure that reinforces and creates safe places so people are clear about what are my goals, what are my expectations, who's responsible for what. I actually just did a 90-second video on how to know if you're at risk from a structure point of view in your organization, and if you're undermining your own resiliency. So those are things like looking at job descriptions. Those are things that don't cost us except for time. And so looking at it systemically, I think, is part of what like Dörte described in looking at what am I driving from the behavior I need, and how can I help manage those psychosocial risks within the organization.
You know, going with that one size fits all theme, just to kind of give you a little shout out, Al, I sat through Alessandra's program on building resiliency. And one of the things that I so much appreciated about it, and I've spoken about this in other sessions of this too, is that when you talk about something like journaling, you gave us 10 different ways that we might do that. Because I might say, well, no, I'm not a journaler and I'm not a writer, but, you know, I ended up pulling pictures, right, to tell the story, right, from you know, just pulled them and cut them from the internet while we were doing the journaling activity. And you know, when you were doing mindfulness activities, and Jay, I don't know if on Headspace, if you've got this kind of variety, but it's like, okay, you don't like this, you can do this. You don't, that feels kind of creepy to you. Well, do this. That feels too out there. You do this. And there were, it was like a continuum of things. So I would say if you're investing in a program or training of some skills, make sure that or a tool or app, make sure that it has that, it offers that gamut, right? A variety. I see you nodding, Jay. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, yeah, and shameless Headspace plug. Yes, we do. And we continually evolve in the need to offer diverse offerings. So never perfect, but purposeful in the approach of providing access to everyone. And I think about things like, if you're a reader, you'll read articles. And if you're a doer, you'll do the meditations. And that might be through the animations or through YouTube or through the app. But like, it's really important to be able to provide people a variety of opportunities to be successful.
And I'll plug Hannah. Now we're just going to keep plugging each other. So with what she's built with her Kite platform, what's so lovely about it, one, it's such a beautiful, lovely experience. But it has that micro learning component of it's just one thing, right? And so that, I think, is that micros, those nudges, and that's how the brain works in creating change and in rewiring our how we think. So you know, I think there's lots of options on the market, which is why I brought this group together, because you guys have visibility to what other companies are doing and how they're handling. Again, it isn't just about burnout. It isn't about mental illness. We all have feelings. We all have you know, his family history. We all have those kryptonites that can get in our way. And so that's why I wanted us to talk about this. This isn't a gap. We're not broken if we feel.
Absolutely, in terms of the overwhelm. So I think that sometimes businesses can become so overwhelmed with the amount of products and solutions that it stalls them. It's almost like there's too much. I don't know how to make a decision. I don't know what's going to be the best return on investment. I don't want to overwhelm my employees with all these initiatives. You know, we talk about now initiative fatigue. Like, there's a lot of situations where there's so much being thrown out there and people don't know what's meant to stick, what they're meant to do about it, you know. And I think breaking things down into very achievable pieces is so key.
I also think it's important for employers to understand it's not your job to heal your employees. it's your individual's job. It's individuals. We have to take on the ownership of that. But what you do is, as a partner in this relationship, provide support. I don't think autonomy and support are exclusive. And so it's okay for me to own a piece of this and choose what's best for me in the approach, but you offer access and support, vulnerability to be able to have these conversations. All that's really important in a community-minded approach to this matter.
And I just want to sort of build on the choice piece of that, right? That I think where there can be a challenge is there's a lot, like, you know, Headspace is a great example of an organization that has good brand recognition, and like people are talking a lot about mindfulness. I think I saw a stat that the CDC said that mindfulness is the most popular like modality that people are choosing. You know, that just really speaks to sort of the ubiquity of where people are headed, and that's great. But the thing that I'll say to the employers, you know, who are tuned in, there's lots of little bits of programming that are being feathered in with your benefits. And some of those can be helpful, and sometimes it gets distracting because what you have are people or organizations who are generally kind of outside of that space saying, oh man, we got to address this. And so we're going to feather in like Talkspace or BetterHelp or like, you know, like reasonably, you know, good companies or good solutions, but now you have like a half dozen of them. And so the employee is going, to your point, Jay, like it's not the employer's job to fix them. I think it's the employer's role to create a supportive space and then provide opportunity for them to engage where it makes sense for them. But if you've got like too many choices, it's like, you know, walking down the cereal aisle, you know, at the supermarket, you're like, oh my God, what do I pick? And if your kid's with you, you know, then you're getting Captain Crunch. But I think it's sort of providing a clear pathway in discrete areas of total well-being. And in particular, of course, we're talking about emotional well-being, but it may need to start somewhere else. You may need to get a good night's sleep before you can get a handle on another piece of it.
You know, as I listen to you guys and I hear you talking about, you know, we don't want to overwhelm the organization, and that's always an HR thing, right? We don't want to be rolling out too many things or too many initiatives. And one of the things, though, as I've heard you talking, what I was coming together in my head here is that, you know, it doesn't always have to feel like you're doing something new, right? So your benefits, you're adding something in your benefits. And so benefits is, you know, doing something. Your people that are doing leadership development and learning and, you know, personal effectiveness, skill building, it may just be they're tweaking their programs. They may not be adding a whole new training, but adding a module to your people manager training now on how to have these conversations with your employees. It's, you know, you putting examples in your training that happens to be a well-being example. And so I think to be really thoughtful about, not all of these have to be big, giant initiatives, but if we did a little bit of everything we do a little bit better, you know, as we think about our community service activities, you know, different things that we're doing, how do we add this component to be help, you know, to bring awareness there? How can we remind them of there may be things that we have existing that people aren't making the connection that this is here to help you with your well-being. So reinforce some existing things, remind people this is not new.
And I think we were talking about return on investment from a company perspective, but I think we also need to think about for employees, for them to invest their time into an initiative that their organisation is rolling out. They need to know that there's some return on that too. And I think that's where some of that education comes in, which is the why and how this, you know, what this might do for you, and why we've created this for you. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten. You know, it's just, hey, we've got this new thing, we're rolling it out, and people just sort of don't really know why. So bringing it back to that.
I think it's also to not just go to another solution, because throwing a bunch of things on top of a toxic culture isn't going to make the culture less toxic. So we've got to look at, like I think Philip, you said, the radical notion of actually listening to our employees. We have to face the truth and be honest with ourselves about, and Jay, you mentioned this as well, who are we and how are decisions made? Where are the power structures in our organization? Where are we investing resources? When the push comes to shove, how does work get done? What's the ugly truth? And then is that working for us or against us? Is it helpful or unhelpful? And then we can talk about all these other solutions. Because if we have leaders that are abusive or toxic, no app or fruit bowl in New Zealand is going to make a difference.
Hannah mentioned something that, to kind of shift the thinking a little bit, like what is the result? What would be the good that would come out of it? As we're talking about all of these challenges and, toxic and, burnout, all these words that are a bit pretty overwhelming and in a sense kind of negative. The reality here is if we could get our arms around this and solve for this, this is powerful and could invent the way that businesses run and HRs, leaders lead and all of this. So let's do a little spin. Like what's exciting to you guys as you're doing this work? What are the exciting things you're seeing already happening? What is our future if we, not just that we're going to fix something broken, but what could be?
I think one thing I'm really excited about is just seeing some vulnerability in leaders. So seeing leaders stepping up and talking about their experience with burnout or mental health or whatever it is. And the more that happens, the more other leaders are confident to do so pretty publicly. And I think that that's creating a big shift. And the leaders that are doing that in those organizations, Xero, the accounting platform, global, but based here, the key members of that team are talking very openly about their mental health, and people want to work there. People are going there because they can see that change happening, and it's not even necessarily what they've got on offer. They can just see that I want to work for that person, or I want to work for that team. So that's really exciting, because I think the more that it happens, it's just a snowball effect in many ways.
That really speaks to me, because I think an element that I've always been a little bit nervous about or skeptical of in the wellness work is our goal really this eternal happiness? Is it always the sunshine? And I find that we sometimes cross the line to the toxic positivity almost. And what you describe as leaders being open and showing vulnerability about their experience is kind of normalizing some of the difficulties that come with working. The tedium of it, the boring things, or the emotionally really challenging components, of in my case dealing with cancer patients. And it's not the goal to turn all of this into happy, 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 everyone survives, because they don't. But to say there's a space where I can show up authentically as a person who is sometimes sad, sometimes overwhelmed, sometimes afraid, sometimes happy or content, and taking a little bit the pathology out of a majority of emotions, frankly. We have gotten to the point where everything except happiness is a deficit. And thinking about emotions and the more difficult ones as just as necessary and as normal and healthy as every other one, I think is a really important piece for me to remind my colleagues and be informed by for my kind of work.
That's such a good point, Dörte. You mentioned earlier about lifting up that intelligence or that maturity about understanding that emotions are nuanced, right? They aren't good, bad. And so one of the things, that we teach is about understanding what's helpful and unhelpful. and as opposed to you named it toxic positivity, because it isn't about being in bliss. It's about understanding when you feel something and then knowing what to do with it, right, in a healthy and productive way, and acknowledging that emotions are natural. That's how our brains evolved. And so now we just need to be equipped to recognize them and understand how best to react in a productive way.
Yeah, and I'll sort of build on that to say, and I love this sort of you guys' remarks around authenticity. I think, you know, what I've heard through the pandemic, I moderated a few sort of CEO panels with Hub clients, and I heard from CEOs and some of the like senior HR leaders that they almost missed, like during COVID, like in the height when everyone was working remote, they were sending like a weekly letter out to everyone. And while I think that was a lot of work, what I heard was they sort of missed it, right? That they got a lot of that positive feedback that you're talking about, and they were able to be more authentic because we were all sharing in the experience, in the crappy experience, right? There's, even as like income inequality and all those things have continued to kind of push us apart, you know, COVID has been a bit of an equalizer. And so, you know, Kim, you asked sort of what, you know, what's sort of the phoenix that will rise from the ashes. And I do hope it's more authenticity. I hope that more senior leaders were sort of maybe forced into being more expressive. And what came back was like all of this, like, wow, man, thank you for sharing that, as opposed to like, because it probably felt really scary. And instead of feeling diminished, they felt built up and supported, right? Some of those other emotions. And so I'm glad that and it's also created a space for us to have conversations like this, where we can talk about the fact that like positive psychology has given us so many really awesome tools, but on its face, people are just like, no, you have to be happy all the time. And that's not what it's about, right? And sort of doing these things has real results. You know, Al, you talked about some of the ROI stuff, right? There's great data around just the impact that interacting with people, connecting socially, acknowledging people, right? Like that leads to like real meaningful business outcomes. It's not just a feel good.
Yeah, just think of the energy that it takes to hide grief, mask your sadness or pain, those kinds of things, right? And even just not being your authentic self. So when you don't have to use that energy throughout your whole entire day, just think of the energy that you have left then for the people that matter outside of work, right? And, you know, and so and also as I think about these skills and these techniques and things that we're talking about in the workplace, these are also things that you can take home to your families and your children. So many times we don't know how to talk about our feelings and emotions because we didn't learn how to do that at home. We didn't learn how to do that in school. We haven't learned how to do that in the workplace. So as you really learn to get better at this, let's take it home and teach our kids. I know in the schools, they're trying to teach them too, right? So we can reinforce it at home.
Well, I have
maybe a lot of
shameless
it
plug
is
for that.
Yeah. Go, Jeff.
Oh, really quickly, just a shameless plug for that. Headspace is free for teens. And we also have a family plan. But I was thinking about the question about what I'm excited about. And there's two things I'm really excited about as we explore the customization of solutions. Things like creating a multifaceted platform. Headspace recently merged with Ginger. So now it's not just about mindfulness. It's not just about meditation and how it as one piece of the puzzle can assist, but now it's incorporating those elements along with mental health and counseling resources. So that makes me really excited as solutions begin to expand offerings as a need that companies and employers are asking for. Secondly, it's this idea of roles that have historically been in the shadows coming to the forefront. Community, DE&I, you know, those roles were typically one-off, 15 years ago. Now they're prominent roles within organizations interested in improving the well-being and the mental health of their employees, because those roles are put in positions where you can host, facilitate, moderate those difficult conversations and hold leaders and managers accountable for not only outcomes, but long-term solutions.
Fantastic. Just to talk around quickly around here in New Zealand, I'm actually part of a e-mental health or digital health group, and it is full of suppliers, government representatives, other associations, and the whole goal of it is to work together. So we have so many solutions. How do we create an ecosystem? How do we create a way for employers to actually really be able to assess what they need, when they need it, and that we actually work together? So, you know, my goal is that, you know, we start collaborating even as competitors. You know, like it's been very traditionally like separate solutions and we're all competing. Whereas I think now it's this collective goal of bringing about change, and how best do we do that? And often the best way to do that is to work together. So I think that's a really exciting change that I hope, you know, really takes off.
I'm going to ask the panelists as we start to close out here to share one final thought, like, you know, 30 seconds or less that you just want to leave people with, or that stood out to you, whether it's a new thought or reinforcing. Before we do that, let me thank everybody for joining us and let you know that you will receive an email. It sounds like most people want that report you talked about, Dr. Al. It'll be provide links to everybody's LinkedIn again, so you can kind of reach out to anybody that's been on the panel if you want to. I appreciate the comments in the chat. Thank you all for being here. We also will send the link to the recording that's out there, as well as it'll have where you go to find that. You'll find the other ones that we've done from the other sessions. So as we go around, I'll get us in the order, the same order I guess that maybe we started with, but we'll for your final thought, Al.
Well, I'll say my catchphrase that I said at the beginning: emotions are not an illness, and let's all be kind to ourselves and understand that feeling is how we evolved to behave in the world.
Okay, Philip, I see your mic off, so let's go to you.
I just would encourage people to sort of think about what's meaningful for them. And if you're building a program, think about what would feel right to you, and that might be like part of the path forward for, you know, your people.
Okay, Dörte, I see you're ready, Mike.
Yeah, I built on that, and I would encourage everyone to, as they think about wellness and well-being, to also introduce meaning and purpose in that conversation. It is not about happiness, it is about meaning and purpose.
Hannah.
I'm just going to say that vulnerability is a beautiful thing, and if everyone today can go away and at some point during the day show some sort of vulnerability and share maybe something that's not going so well, I think, you know, it's a powerful thing.
Thank you. And the last word, Jay.
I think it's really important for we as humans to take ownership of our own mental health and well-being and lead by example. That's the best way to provide testimony. So taking care of oneself then allows you to offer the community access to the abundance of your overflow. And in that turn, that's how we change on a broader scale. So self-care first, that allows you to feed into the broader community, and that will change how we lead in the world.
And I got to chill with that. So thank you for that one. All right. We'll go ahead and close out the session. So thank you very much. If I could ask the panelists to stay on just a moment, and I will drop everybody from the call. Thank you so much, you guys.